The laughter started as a whisper. Carenza Whitmore stood frozen in the center of the Hartwell Ballroom, her cream silk gown suddenly feeling like a shroud, as 300 pairs of eyes fixed upon her, with expressions ranging from pity to cruel delight. The chandeliers above cast merciless light upon the scene unfolding before her, a scene she could not escape, no matter how desperately her mind screamed at her legs to move. Quentin Ashford, the man she had loved for 2 years, the man who had promised her forever just 3 weeks ago, stood 5 feet away with another woman draped upon his arm. Lady Sophronia Harcourt, with her golden curls and sapphire silk, smiled like a cat who had cornered something small and helpless. "Surely you didn't believe him," Sophronia said, her voice pitched to carry across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Nah, a merchant's daughter with a disgraced father? Quentin was merely being charitable. We've been engaged for months." The words landed like physical blows. Carenza's gaze flew to Quentin, searching for denial, for outrage, for anything that would prove this was some terrible misunderstanding. He looked away. "Quentin," her voice emerged as barely a whisper. "Tell her she's wrong. Tell them." The silence stretched like a blade being drawn. Somewhere behind her, a woman tittered. The sound broke something open, and suddenly the whispers erupted like wildfire through the assembled guests. "Did you hear? The Whitmore girl actually thought her father lost everything to gambling debts, you know. Tragic, really. One almost pities her. Pity. She aimed above her station. This is precisely what comes of—" Quentin finally met her eyes, and what Carenza saw there was worse than cruelty. It was indifference. "Miss Whitmore, I apologize if my kindness gave you false impressions. Lady Sophronia and I have had an understanding since childhood. Surely you must have realized you proposed to me." The words tore from her throat, raw and desperate. She knew she should stay silent, preserve what little dignity remained, but the betrayal was too enormous to contain. "In my mother's garden. You gave me your grandmother's ring. You said, I said many things." His voice hardened, and she saw it then, the calculation beneath the charm. The man she had loved had never existed. Things that were appropriate to the moment. Surely a woman of your circumstances understands how these arrangements work. The ring. The ring was still hidden in her jewelry box at home, a secret she'd been savoring until their formal announcement. A ring that apparently meant nothing. Laughter rippled through the crowd, not unkind, exactly, but worse. Amused. She was entertainment to them, a cautionary tale about reaching too high. Carenza's vision blurred. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. But her feet still would not move, and the walls of silk and jewels and judgmental eyes pressed closer with every passing second. "Someone should escort the poor creature out," a matron said loudly, "before she embarrasses herself further." And then, from somewhere near the back of the ballroom, came the sound of a chair scraping against marble. The whispers died, as if strangled. Carenza blinked, following the gazes of the crowd, and felt her pulse stutter to a halt. A man was rising to his feet. Tall, a dark-haired, with a face that looked carved from granite and shadows. He moved through the parting crowd with the unhurried grace of someone who had never once been refused anything in his entire life, and people, lords and ladies of the finest families in England, scrambled to clear his path. She knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. Hadrian Vance, the Duke of Ashworth, the man they called the Devil of Ashworth, behind his back, never to his face. The man whose first wife had died under mysterious circumstances. The man who had dueled 3 men and left 2 of them permanently maimed. the man whose ice-colored eyes were said to freeze grown men where they stood. Those eyes were fixed on her now. Carence's lungs seized as he approached, his boots clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that matched her thundering pulse. Behind her, she heard Quentin make a small, strangled sound. Sophronia's smug expression faltered. The Duke stopped directly before Carenza. This close, she could see the sharp angles of his jaw, the thin scar that curved along his left cheekbone, the way shadows seemed to cling to him like loyal servants. He was magnificent. He was looking at her as if she were the only person in the room. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. "I believe you promised me the supper waltz." She had promised him nothing. She had never exchanged a single word with this man in her life. But his eyes held hers with an intensity that brooked no argument, and his gloved hand extended toward her, steady as stone. I don't," she stammered. "Well, surely you haven't forgotten." His voice dropped, meant only for her ears now, and something in his gaze shifted. A warning, an offer, a demand. "Come with me now, and I will destroy them. Refuse, and you walk out of this ballroom alone, into a life where tonight defines you forever. Choose." The words hit her like ice water, shocking her back into her body. She looked at his extended hand, elegant, powerful, belonging to the most dangerous man in London society. She looked at Quentin, whose face had gone pale. She looked at Sophronia, whose triumphant smile had curdled into something uncertain. And Carenza Whitmore, daughter of a disgraced merchant, woman with nothing left to lose, placed her trembling hand in the Devil of Ashworth's grip. His fingers closed around hers, warm, firm, utterly controlled. "Excellent choice," he murmured. Then he tucked her hand into the crook of his arm and turned to face the ballroom, and his next words were spoken with the casual authority of a man announcing the weather. "It seems congratulations are in order. Miss Whitmore has accepted my courtship. I trust you will all extend her the appropriate respect due to a woman under my protection." The silence that followed was absolute, and somewhere in the wreckage of her ruined evening, as 300 people stared at her with expressions of shock, Carenza realized she had just traded one disaster for something far more dangerous. She just didn't know yet what the Devil of Ashworth wanted in return. The Duke's carriage was as dark and imposing as its owner. Carenza sat rigidly on the velvet seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across from her, see Hadrian Vance, the man who had just claimed her before all of London society, watched her with those unsettling winter-gray eyes. Neither of them had spoken since leaving the ballroom. The carriage rolled through the London streets, gas lamps casting fleeting stripes of gold through the windows. Carenza's mind raced, trying to process what had just happened, what she had agreed to, what possible reason this man could have for saving her. "You have questions," he said finally. Not a question himself, a statement of fact. "You have answers, I assume." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Good. She would not let him see how thoroughly he unnerved her. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest ghost of amusement. Direct. I appreciate that. Most people stammer in my presence. Most people haven't just had their lives destroyed and reconstructed in the span of 10 minutes. I've rather lost my capacity for stammering. This time, his lips definitely curved. It was not quite a smile. She suspected this man's face had forgotten how to form such an expression. But it was something adjacent. "You're angry." "I'm confused. There's a difference." She forced herself to hold his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to look away. "You don't know me. We've never spoken. And yet you just announced to 300 people that you're courting me. So yes, Your Grace, I have questions. Starting with, why? He leaned back against the seat, the shadows carving his features into something almost otherworldly. Nah, because you served a purpose at precisely the moment I needed you to. How flattering. I don't offer flattery, Miss Whitmore. I offer facts. He steepled his fingers, studying her over them. My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, has decided that I must marry immediately. She's been parading eligible women before me like horses at auction for the past 6 months. Lady Sophronia, the charming creature who just humiliated you, was her current favorite. Carence's stomach dropped. Lady Sophronia was meant for you? My grandmother believes so. Lady Sophronia certainly believes so. I, however, have no intention of marrying a woman whose cruelty is exceeded only by her ambition. His eyes glittered in the darkness. Your Mr. Ashford was simply a diversion for her, a way to pass the time until I proposed. She never intended to marry him. The scene tonight was calculated to destroy a rival. You, while positioning herself as the victim of his wandering attention. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Quentin had been used, just as she had been used. The difference was that Quentin had been complicit in his own deception, while Carenza had simply been naive. So you intervened to spite her, Carenza said slowly, to remove her as an option. Partially. He tilted his head. I also intervened because watching Ashford's pathetic betrayal disgusted me, and I found myself curious what a woman with nothing to lose might do if offered a lifeline. And if I had refused your hand? You didn't. But if I had? His smile was sharp as a blade. Then I would have known you were not the woman I needed, and I would have found another way to solve my problem. But you didn't refuse, Miss Whitmore. You chose chaos over defeat. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Before Carenza could respond, the carriage slowed. Through the window, she glimpsed an enormous townhouse, its windows glowing with warm light, its facade elegant and imposing. Ashworth House, the Duke said. My London residence. You'll be staying here. I absolutely will not. You absolutely will. He spoke without heat, as if her objection was merely a detail to be managed. I've just announced my courtship to all of society. If you return home tonight, alone, the gossip will tear you apart by morning. They'll say I reconsidered. They'll say I found you lacking. Everything I did tonight will have been for nothing, and you'll be in a worse position than before. She hated that he was right. And if I stay, what exactly are you proposing? An arrangement. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. For the remainder of the season, you will play the role of a woman being courted by me. You will attend events on my arm, be seen in my company, and give every appearance of a potential match. In exchange, I will provide you with protection, gowns, social rehabilitation, and at the end of the season, references and connections that will secure your future. And what do you gain? Freedom from my grandmother's machinations. As long as I'm publicly pursuing you, she cannot force another match upon me. Lady Sophronia will be neutralized, and when the season ends, we will simply decide we don't suit. You'll depart with your reputation restored, and I'll have bought myself time. It was logical. Cold, calculated, and entirely logical. There has to be more to it than that, Carenza said. A man like you doesn't rescue strangers at balls out of convenience. What aren't you telling me? For the first time, his expression wavered. Something she couldn't read passing behind his eyes. You're perceptive. Good. You'll need to be. He paused. Let's just say I have reasons for avoiding marriage that go beyond mere reluctance. Reasons I may share with you in time, if you prove trustworthy. The carriage door opened, revealing a footman in immaculate livery. "I haven't agreed to anything," Carenza said quickly. "Then agree now, or let me take you home and watch your life crumble by breakfast." He rose, stepping out of the carriage and turning to offer his hand. "The choice, Miss Whitmore, is entirely yours." She stared at his outstretched hand, the same hand that had saved her an hour ago, the same hand that belonged to a man called the Devil by everyone who knew him. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I have conditions." His eyebrow rose. "You're negotiating with me. You need me as much as I need you. That makes us equals in this, Your Grace, whatever your title may suggest." His expression flickered. Respect, perhaps, or intrigue. "Name your conditions." "First, my family must be informed properly. My mother will worry herself into illness if she hears gossip before truth. I want a letter delivered tonight, explaining that I've accepted a position as a companion to your household. Nothing about arrangements or schemes. Done. Second, when this ends, I want real references, and letters of introduction from your household, from anyone you can persuade to vouch for me. I will not return to what I was before. I need a future. That can be arranged. Third." She met his eyes directly. "The moment you decide to actually marry, whether Lady Sophronia or anyone else, you tell me immediately. I won't be used as a shield while you conduct a real courtship in the shadows. I may be poor, Your Grace, but I'm not a fool, and I refuse to be made to look like one." The silence stretched between them, charged with something electric. Then Hadrian Vance smiled. A real smile this time, though no less dangerous for its authenticity. "You have my word. All 3 conditions. Agreed." He extended his hand once more. "Do we have a bargain, Miss Whitmore?" Carenza thought of Quentin's betrayal, of Sophronia's cruelty, so of the wreckage of everything she had believed her life would be. She thought of her mother's worried face, her brother's debts, and the slow suffocation of genteel poverty. She took his hand. "We have a bargain." His grip was firm and warm, sealing a bargain that would change everything. She just didn't know yet how much. Ashworth House was not a home. It was a monument. Carenza followed the Duke through the grand entrance, her borrowed slippers clicking against marble floors, so polished she could see her own pale reflection staring back at her. Everything gleamed, the crystal chandeliers dripping light like frozen waterfalls, the gilt-framed portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and the sweeping staircase that curved upward into shadows. The air smelled of beeswax and hothouse flowers and old money. "Mrs. Pemberton will show you to your rooms," the Duke said, gesturing toward a severe-looking woman in black who had materialized from somewhere in the house's depths. "You'll find everything you need has been prepared." "Prepared?" Carenza turned to him sharply. "You couldn't have known I would agree to this. I knew someone would." His expression gave nothing away. "The room has been ready for weeks. I simply hadn't found the right candidate until tonight." He inclined his head, a gesture of dismissal. "Rest. Tomorrow will be demanding." And then he was gone, disappearing down a corridor as if the shadows had simply reclaimed him. Carenza stood alone in the vast entrance hall, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. "This way, miss," Mrs. Pemberton said, her tone carefully neutral, as if she found anything unusual about a strange woman arriving at midnight with the master, she gave no indication. "The Primrose Suite has been prepared for you." The Primrose Suite turned out to be larger than the entire upper floor of Carenza's family home. She stopped in the doorway, unable to fully process what she was seeing. A 4-poster bed draped in silk the color of spring dawn, a writing desk positioned beneath windows that would overlook the gardens, a wardrobe larger than her bedroom back home, a sitting room with its own fireplace already crackling with welcoming flames. Fresh flowers, primroses naturally, arranged in crystal vases on every surface. The Duke's sister, Lady Anthea, selected the furnishings, Mrs. Pemberton said. She hoped whoever occupied this room would find it cheerful. His sister? Lady Anthea Vance. She resides here as well. I'm certain she'll wish to meet you in the morning. Was that the faintest hint of warmth in the housekeeper's voice? Is there anything else you require tonight, miss? Carenza shook her head mutely, still trying to absorb the fact that this beautiful room was meant to be hers, even temporarily, even as part of a bargain she didn't fully understand. Very well. I'll send Nanette up shortly. She's been assigned as your lady's maid. And then Mrs. Pemberton was gone, and Carenza was alone. She walked slowly through the suite, trailing her fingers over silk and velvet and polished wood. This morning, she had woken in her narrow bed in their cramped lodgings, on listening to her mother's quiet weeping through the thin walls. Tonight, she stood in a room that cost more than her family's entire annual income, bound by a bargain to a man society called the Devil. The absurdity of it crashed over her, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs finally giving way. What had she done? She thought of her mother, who had sacrificed everything to maintain appearances after father's disgrace, who still set the table with their remaining good china, as if pretending they weren't slowly drowning could somehow keep them afloat, who had been so hopeful about Quentin's attention, so certain that finally things would turn around for them. She thought of her brother Corwin, who pretended his business ventures were legitimate, but who came home with bruised knuckles and borrowed money that never seemed to be enough, who had introduced her to Quentin in the first place, through connections she now realized she should have questioned. She thought of her father, once a respected merchant, now a ghost who haunted their home with silent shame, broken by one bad investment and the betrayal of a partner he had trusted. And she thought of herself, Carenza Whitmore, who had believed in fairy tales just long enough to have them shattered before 300 witnesses. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Miss, I'm Nanette. Mrs. Pemberton sent me. The girl who entered was young, perhaps 18, with copper curls escaping from beneath her cap and freckles scattered across a friendly face, and she carried a tray with tea and small sandwiches that made Carenza's stomach rumble. She hadn't eaten since that afternoon, too nervous about the ball to manage more than a few bites. Thought you might be hungry, Nanette said with a shy smile. Balls never have proper food, do they? All fancy little things that leave you starving. Carenza found herself smiling back, the first genuine expression she'd managed in hours. That's very thoughtful. Thank you. The Duke's orders, miss, said you were to have everything you needed. Nanette set about preparing the room for the night, with practiced efficiency, turning down the bed, laying out a nightgown of fine cotton. Will you be needing help with your dress? Carenza glanced down at the cream silk gown, the nicest thing she owned, purchased with the last of her mother's jewelry money, specifically for tonight's ball. It had been meant to impress Quentin's family. Now it felt like a costume from a play that had ended badly. Yes, she said quietly. Thank you. As Nanette helped her undress, chattering cheerfully about the household, Carenza learned several crucial pieces of information. Lady Anthea was 20 years old, kind-hearted, and desperately lonely since her mother's death years ago. The Dowager Duchess was formidable, exacting, and currently in residence, though she kept to her own wing. The Duke himself was rarely seen. He spent most of his time in his study, or out on mysterious business that no one quite understood. Is he... Carenza hesitated. Is he truly as frightening as everyone says? Nanette's hands paused on the buttons. He's not cruel, miss. Not to staff, anyway. Pays fair, never raises his voice. But he's... She searched for the right word. Distant. like there's a wall of ice around him that no one can melt. Even Lady Anthea can barely reach him anymore, and they used to be so close before. Before the first Duchess died. Nanette's voice dropped to a whisper. They say she fell from the tower window. They say he was the last one to see her alive. They say... She caught herself, face flushing. I'm sorry, miss. I shouldn't gossip. It's all right. But Carence's pulse had quickened. What do they say? Nanette shook her head firmly. Old rumors, miss. Nothing worth repeating. The Duke is a good master, whatever people whisper. That's all that matters to us below stairs. But as the maid finished her work and departed with a cheerful good night, Carenza sat in her beautiful borrowed bed, surrounded by silk and luxury and the faint scent of primroses, and felt the first tendrils of real fear curl through her chest. She had made a bargain with a man whose wife had died under mysterious circumstances. A man the whole of London called the devil. A man who had saved her tonight for reasons he refused to fully explain. Tomorrow she would meet the Dowager Duchess. Tomorrow she would begin playing her role in whatever game Hadrian Vance was truly playing. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight, alone in her gilded cage, Carenza could not shake the feeling that she had escaped one trap only to walk willingly into another. And somewhere in the darkness of Ashworth House, she could have sworn she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Pacing, restless, so like a predator that could not find sleep. Morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through silk curtains and the distant sounds of a household already in motion. Carenza woke disoriented, her body registering the impossible softness of the mattress before her mind caught up with where she was. For one blissful moment, she forgot everything: the ballroom, the humiliation, the bargain. Then memory crashed back, and she sat up so quickly her head spun. Nanette appeared within minutes, carrying a breakfast tray and a dress that Carenza had certainly never seen before. A morning gown of soft lavender muslin with delicate embroidery at the hem and sleeves. Lady Anthea sent it, Nanette explained, laying it across the bed. She said you'd need something proper for today. Today? The Dowager Duchess wishes to see you at 10 o'clock, one in her private sitting room. The tea Carenza had been sipping suddenly tasted like ash. By the time 10 o'clock arrived, she had changed into the borrowed dress, had her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, and had paced the length of her suite, approximately 47 times. Her stomach churned with nerves she refused to show as Mrs. Pemberton led her through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate, past portraits of disapproving ancestors, beneath ceilings painted with scenes of classical triumph, through doorways carved with the Ashworth crest. The Dowager's sitting room was smaller than Carenza expected, but no less imposing. Every surface gleamed with the patina of old wealth and older power, and in the center of it all, seated in a chair that might as well have been a throne, was Margaret Vance, the Dowager Duchess of Ashworth. She was not what Carenza had imagined. Where she had expected frailty, she found steel. The Dowager was perhaps 70, with silver hair arranged in an elaborate style, sharp gray eyes that missed nothing, and a posture so perfect it made Carenza's spine ache in sympathy. She wore mourning black for her husband, dead these 15 years, but made it look like armor rather than grief. So, the Dowager said, her voice crisp as winter frost, "You're the creature my grandson plucked from obscurity last night." Carenza curtsied, grateful for her mother's relentless instruction in proper deportment. "Your Grace, thank you for receiving me. I haven't decided whether I'm receiving you or dissecting you. Sit." Carenza sat. The Dowager studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment, and her gaze traveling from Carenza's borrowed dress to her carefully arranged hair to her hands, which Carenza was fighting to keep still in her lap. "Whitmore," the dowager said finally. "Your father was Bertram Whitmore, the merchant who lost everything to Marcus Crane's scheme 3 years ago." It wasn't a question, but Carenza answered anyway. "Yes, Your Grace." "And your mother is Lillian Whitmore, née Fairchild, a gentleman's daughter, who married beneath her station for love, only to watch her husband destroy everything she sacrificed for." The words were brutal in their accuracy. "Yes, Your Grace." "And your brother, Corwin Whitmore, has accumulated gambling debts with at least 4 establishments in London. Debts he has been attempting to pay off through increasingly desperate schemes with increasingly unsavory associates." Carenza's face burned, but she held the dowager's gaze. "You've done your research." "I do my research on everyone who enters my grandson's orbit." The dowager leaned forward slightly. "What I cannot determine through research, however, is why Hadrian chose you. Of all the desperate young women in London, why you specifically?" "I don't know." "Don't lie to me, girl." "I'm not lying." Carenza's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I don't know why he chose me. I was simply there, at the right moment, in the right circumstances. The right circumstances being your public humiliation at the hands of a fortune-hunting cad and his ambitious accomplice." Something in the dowager's tone made Carenza pause. "You knew about Quinton and Lady Sophronia." "Of course I knew. I arranged for Lady Sophronia to attend the Hartwell ball specifically because I knew Ashford would be there with you." The dowager's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "I wanted her to see what she was competing against. I didn't expect her to be quite so theatrical in eliminating the competition." The revelation hit Carenza like a physical blow. "You orchestrated my humiliation?" "I orchestrated an opportunity for Lady Sophronia to prove herself unsuitable, which she did, spectacularly." The dowager's gray eyes glittered. "I had no interest in seeing my grandson married to a woman capable of such public cruelty. I simply didn't expect him to respond by claiming her victim as his own." "So you're not angry that he chose me?" "I'm furious that he chose anyone at all without consulting me. I'm intrigued that he chose someone with nothing to offer but cleverness and desperation. And I'm curious whether you're intelligent enough to understand what you've walked into." "Then enlighten me." The dowager's eyebrow rose. "You have spine. Good. You'll need it." She rose from her chair and moved to the window, her black silk rustling like whispered secrets. "My grandson is not the monster society believes him to be, but he is damaged. His first wife's death destroyed something in him. Something, I fear, cannot be repaired." "What happened to her? Truly?" The dowager was silent for a long moment. "Arabella was fragile, beautiful, charming, and completely wrong for him. I opposed the match, but Hadrian was young and convinced he was in love. They married, and within 2 years, she was dead. The rumors say he killed her." The dowager turned, her expression unreadable. "The rumors are wrong. Arabella killed herself, threw herself from the tower window while Hadrian watched, helpless to stop her. He has blamed himself ever since." The horror of it stole Carenza's breath. "Why? Because he couldn't save her. Because he believes he failed her. Because guilt is a prison he's built around himself, and he refuses to leave it." The dowager moved closer, her voice dropping. "I want him to marry because I want him to live again, to feel something beyond duty and grief. Lady Sophronia would have bored him into an early grave. But you—" She studied Carenza with renewed intensity. "You might actually reach him. Or you might make everything worse. I haven't decided which." "And if I make it worse?" The dowager's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then I will destroy you so thoroughly that no one will remember your name." It should have scared her. Instead, Carenza found herself standing taller. "I understand, Your Grace. But I should warn you, I've already lost everything once. I survived. Whatever you threaten me with, I'll survive that too. Something flickered in the dowager's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. We shall see, she said softly. We shall see indeed. 3 days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Lady Anthea descended upon Carenza like a force of nature, warm where her brother was cold, vibrant where he was shadowed, determined to transform her brother's unlikely courtship into something resembling success. She dragged Carenza to modistes and milliners, commissioned gowns and fabrics Carenza had only ever admired through shop windows, and chattered endlessly about society, fashion, and which lords to avoid at all costs. Lord Bramwell has wandering hands, she warned during one carriage ride. Lord Osborne talks only of his racehorses, and whatever you do, don't let Lady Marchmont corner you. She'll extract your entire life story and spread it through 3 drawing rooms before dinner. Through it all, the Duke remained a ghost. Carenza glimpsed him occasionally, crossing the entrance hall at dawn, disappearing into his study with stacks of papers, riding out on a black stallion that suited his dark reputation. He acknowledged her with brief nods, exchanged the minimum required pleasantries at the few meals they shared, and otherwise acted as if she didn't exist. It shouldn't have stung. This was an arrangement, nothing more. But somehow it did. He's always like this, Anthea said on the 4th evening, finding Carenza in the library. Since Arabella, he buries himself in work, estate business, investments, parliament, anything to avoid actually feeling things. Your grandmother told me about how she died. Anthea's bright expression dimmed. She told you the truth. That's unusual. She must see something in you. She settled into a chair across from Carenza. He was different before, you know. Hadrian. He laughed. He teased me. He was still serious, but there was lightness in him. Her voice caught. I miss that version of my brother. What was she like? Arabella. Beautiful, delicate, like a porcelain figurine. Anthea's tone was careful, diplomatic. She and Hadrian were mismatched. She wanted parties, and admiration, and constant reassurance. He wanted depth, and partnership, and someone who could match his intensity. Neither of them got what they needed. But he loved her. He tried to. I think that's what haunts him most, that he tried so hard, and it still wasn't enough to save her. The library door opened, and both women startled. Hadrian stood in the doorway, coat removed, cravat loosened, looking more human than Carenza had yet seen him. His gaze swept from his sister to Carenza, and something passed across his features. Surprise at finding them together, perhaps, or discomfort at whatever conversation he had interrupted. I didn't realize the library was occupied, he said. It's your library, Carenza pointed out. We're the intruders. You're guests. I'm a guest. Anthea lives here. His sister laughed. She has a point, Hadrian. This is still your domain. We'll leave you to your brooding. I don't brood. You absolutely brood. Anthea rose, pressing a kiss to her brother's cheek as she passed. Try having an actual conversation. It won't kill you. And then she was gone, leaving Carenza alone with the devil of Ashworth. The silence stretched between them, filled with the crackle of the fire and the weight of words unspoken. You should sit, Carenza said finally. You look exhausted. He hesitated, then moved to the chair his sister had vacated. This close, she could see the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way he held himself like a man carrying an invisible burden. You've been busy, he said. Anthea is determined to remake you into a suitable prospect. Your sister is a force of nature. I suspect resistance is futile. That almost earned her a smile. Almost. She's been happier these past few days than I've seen her in months. Having a project seems to suit her. Is that what I am? A project? You're a disruption. His crystalline gaze met hers. To everyone's expectations, including my own. How so? He didn't answer immediately, staring into the fire as if the flames held answers to questions she couldn't hear. I expected someone more pliable, someone who would simply play the role without asking questions. And instead, you got someone who asks too many questions? Instead, I got someone who negotiated terms with me as if she had any leverage whatsoever, and told my grandmother she'd survive whatever destruction was threatened, and is currently sitting in my library, making observations about my exhaustion as if we were old friends. Carenza felt heat rise to her cheeks. I apologize if I've overstepped. Don't. The word was sharp, but not angry. Don't apologize for being honest. It's refreshing. Most people are too afraid of me to say what they actually think. Should I be afraid of you? The question hung between them. His gaze held hers, and for a moment, she saw something beneath the cold exterior. Something raw and wounded and desperately lonely. Probably, he said quietly, but not for the reasons they think. Then tell me the real reasons. He rose abruptly, moving to the window. The night pressed against the glass like a living thing. You ask too many questions, Miss Whitmore. Carenza, he turned. What? If we're going to convince society you're courting me, you should probably use my given name, at least in private. Another long silence. Then, so softly she almost missed it. Carenza. Her name in his voice did something strange to her heartbeat. The Hardington ball is in 2 days, he said, returning to safer ground. It will be our first public appearance since the Hartwell incident. Everyone will be watching. I know. Are you ready? Carenza thought of the beautiful gowns hanging in her wardrobe, the dancing lessons Anthea had arranged, the careful coaching in who was who and what to say, and how to navigate the treacherous waters of London society. No, she said honestly, but I'll do it anyway. His expression flickered, something that might have been respect warming his features. Good, he said, because after tomorrow night, there's no going back, for either of us. He left without another word, but this time, the silence he left behind felt different. Less cold, less distant, almost like an invitation. The Hardington ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, their light fracturing off crystals and diamonds and the polished marble floors. 300 of London's finest had gathered to see and be seen, but tonight, Carenza knew, they had gathered primarily to see her. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hand resting on Hadrian's arm, and felt the weight of every gaze in the room turning toward them. The gown Anthea had chosen was a masterpiece. Deep sapphire silk that caught the light like captured midnight, with silver embroidery at the bodice and a train that whispered against the marble steps. No diamonds borrowed from the Ashworth collection adorned her throat and ears. She looked, for the first time in her life, like she belonged in a ballroom like this. But looks could be deceiving, and everyone watching knew it. Breathe, Hadrian murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. They can smell fear. I'm not afraid. You're trembling. That's anticipation. The corner of his mouth twitched. Liar. They descended the staircase together, and the whispers erupted like wildfire. That's her, the Whitmore girl. Can you believe the Duke actually brought her? She does clean up rather well. But her family, my dear, the scandal. Perhaps he's finally lost his mind entirely. Carenza kept her chin high, her expression pleasant, and her grip on Hadrian's arm just firm enough to steady herself without appearing to cling. They reached the ballroom floor, and the crowd parted before them like the sea before some dark and terrible ship. Lady Sophronia was the first to approach. She emerged from a cluster of silk-clad admirers, resplendent in rose pink, her smile so sweet it could poison wine. At her side was a woman who could only be her mother, the same golden coloring, the same calculating eyes, and the same air of entitled superiority. "Your Grace," Sophronia purred, curtsying with practiced grace. "How wonderful to see you. And Miss Whitmore." The pause before her name was deliberate, dripping with condescension. "I hardly recognized you without tears streaming down your face." The insult was so brazen that several nearby guests gasped. Carenza felt Hadrian tense beside her, felt the dangerous energy coiling in his frame. But before he could speak, she laid her hand gently over his. "Lady Sophronia," she said, her voice carrying with crystal clarity. "What a lovely gown. Rose has always been so flattering for those with delicate coloring. It draws attention away from imperfections so effectively." Sophronia's smile froze. "I'm so pleased you could attend tonight," Carenza continued sweetly. "I understand social calendars can be rather empty when one's marital prospects have proven disappointing." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a woman laughed, quickly stifled, but unmistakable. Sophronia's eyes blazed with fury, but she had no response that wouldn't make her look worse. She turned on her heel and retreated, her mother hurrying after her. "Well," Hadrian said quietly, "that was unexpected. You sound almost impressed." "I sound exactly as impressed as I am." He guided her deeper into the ballroom. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Survival. When you have nothing, words become weapons." She glanced up at him. "You of all people should understand that." Before he could respond, the orchestra began a new piece, a waltz. Couples moved toward the dance floor, and Carenza felt a sudden flutter of nerves. "I believe this is ours," Hadrian said, offering his hand. They had practiced. Anthea had insisted upon it, hiring a dance master to ensure Carenza wouldn't embarrass herself or the Duke. But practice in an empty parlor was nothing like this. Nothing like the pressure of hundreds of watching eyes. Nothing like the intensity of Hadrian's gaze as he pulled her into position. His hand settled at her waist, her palm pressed against his, and then they were moving. The world narrowed to the space between them. He was an excellent dancer, fluid, confident, guiding her with subtle pressure that made following effortless. But more than that, he was present in a way she hadn't seen before. His eyes never left hers, and something in their depths seemed almost curious. "You're not counting steps," he observed. "You told me not to think, to feel the music instead." I said, "No such thing." "Then I'm imagining the advice." She smiled. "Either way, it's working." They turned across the floor, and she caught glimpses of the watching crowd. Anthea beaming with delight, the dowager observing with narrow assessment, Sophronia glaring with undisguised hatred. "They're all staring," Carenza murmured. He'd let them. His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "You're dancing with the Devil of Ashworth. Of course they're staring." "Does that title bother you? It's useful. Fear keeps people at a distance. And you want to be kept at a distance." His jaw tightened. "What I want is irrelevant. What I need is protection. Distance provides that." "Protection from what?" The music swelled toward its crescendo, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "From wanting things I can't have." The waltz ended. They stood frozen for a heartbeat too long, something charged and dangerous passing between them. Then the crowd erupted in polite applause, and the spell broke. Hadrian released her with careful formality. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Whitmore." "Carenza," she reminded him. that almost smile again. Carenza. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, conversations, and subtle social warfare. Carenza danced with lords who seemed more interested in gathering gossip than in her company. She made polite conversation with matrons who asked pointed questions about her family. She navigated compliments and insults with equal grace, always aware of Hadrian's presence somewhere in the room, always feeling his gaze like a physical touch. Near midnight, she found herself on a quiet terrace, seeking fresh air and a moment's peace. She wasn't alone for long. "You did well tonight." She turned to find Hadrian emerging from the shadows, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered her one, and she took it gratefully. Well enough to convince them, well enough to confuse them, which is almost better. He moved to stand beside her at the balustrade, looking out over the darkened gardens. "They expected you to crumble. You didn't. Now they don't know what to think. And what do you think?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think you're more formidable than I anticipated." "Is that a compliment?" "It's a warning." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "To myself, as much as to you." Carenza's pulse quickened. "I don't understand." "Neither do I." His voice was rough. "That's the problem." Before she could respond, voices drifted from the ballroom, Sophronia's distinctive laugh drawing closer. Hadrian's expression shuddered. "We should return. People will talk if we're absent too long." "They'll talk regardless." "Then let's give them something worth discussing." He offered his arm. One more dance before we leave?" She took his arm, feeling the warmth of him through his sleeve. "As you wish, Your Grace." They returned to the ballroom together, and if Carenza's heart was racing faster than it should, if her skin still tingled where he had touched her, if something fundamental had shifted in the space between them, well, that was her secret to keep, for now. The days following the Hardington ball brought a shift in the household's atmosphere. Where Hadrian had been a ghost before, now he was a shadow, still distant, still guarded, but present in ways he hadn't been. He appeared at breakfast, making dry observations that almost qualified as conversation. He joined Carenza and Anthea for afternoon tea, listening to their chatter with something approaching interest. He even accompanied them to a garden party, on a standing at Carenza's side with such convincing attentiveness that 3 separate matrons commented on how transformed the Duke seemed. "They're saying you've tamed the devil," Anthea whispered gleefully during a music hall. "Lady Pemberton told her daughter, 'You must be a witch.' How flattering. It is, actually. They're unnerved by you now. No one wants to cross the woman who captured Ashworth's attention." But Carenza knew the truth. She hadn't captured anything. She was playing a role, and so was he. The lingering glances, the protective gestures, the way his hand sometimes found the small of her back. It was all performance. Wasn't it? She found herself questioning everything. The way his gaze followed her across crowded rooms, the way his voice softened when they were alone, the way he'd said her name on the terrace. Like it meant something. On the 10th evening of their arrangement, she discovered him in the library again. It was late, past midnight, and she'd come seeking a book to quiet her restless thoughts. She hadn't expected to find him there, standing before the fire with a glass of whiskey in hand, staring into the flames as if they held answers to questions she couldn't hear. "You should be asleep," he said without turning. "So should you." He made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Sleep, and I have a complicated relationship." Carenza moved deeper into the room, drawn by something she couldn't name. Nightmares. Memories. They're worse. She stopped beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his tall frame. In the firelight, his face was all planes and shadows, impossibly handsome and unbearably sad. "Tell me about her," she said softly. Arabella. Not the rumors. The truth. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he drained his whiskey and set the glass aside. She was sunshine, he said finally. When I met her, bright and warm and everything I wasn't. I thought she could save me from the darkness that's always lived inside me, from the weight of this title, this legacy, this endless expectation. But she couldn't. No one could. That was my mistake, believing someone else could fix what was broken in me. His jaw tightened. I failed her. I was too consumed with duty, with the estates, with Parliament. I left her alone too often. She became desperate for attention, for affection, for anything to fill the emptiness I'd created. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? He turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes stole her breath. She told me she was drowning. She told me she needed help, and I said I had meetings, responsibilities, things that couldn't wait. I told her to speak with the physician. I told her to rest. I told her everything except the one thing she needed to hear, which was that she mattered more than any of it, that I would burn the whole bloody estate to the ground if it meant saving her. His voice broke. I didn't say it, and the next morning, she was gone. Carenza reached out before she could stop herself, her hand finding his. His fingers were cold despite the fire's warmth. You couldn't have known, she whispered. I should have known. I should have seen. He stared at their joined hands, as if he couldn't quite believe she was touching him. After she died, I swore I would never let anyone close enough to hurt like that again. Never let myself need someone so completely that losing them would destroy me. And now? His gaze lifted to hers, and what she saw there made everything else fall away. Now, he said hoarsely, I'm beginning to understand that the walls I built to protect myself have become a prison. And you. He raised his free hand, his fingers brushing her cheek with devastating gentleness. You make me want to tear them down. Everything else ceased to exist. His breath mingled with hers. His thumb traced her cheekbone. She could feel him trembling, or perhaps that was her. Hadrian, she breathed. Tell me to stop. His voice was rough, desperate. Tell me this is madness, that we both know how this ends, that I have no right to want. I don't want you to stop. His control shattered. He kissed her with the desperation of a drowning man finding air, his hands holding her face like she was something precious and breakable. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer, closer, needing to feel the reality of him against her. When they finally broke apart, both gasping, his forehead rested against hers. This changes everything, he whispered. I know. We should talk about what this means, what we— The library door crashed open. Lady Sophronia stood in the doorway, flanked by two women Carenza recognized as the worst gossips in London society. Behind them hovered a footman who looked horrified. Well, well, Sophronia said, her voice dripping with triumph. The Devil of Ashworth caught in a compromising position with his little charity case. How deliciously scandalous. Hadrian stepped in front of Carenza, his entire demeanor transforming from vulnerable to lethal in a heartbeat. Get out. Oh, I don't think so. Sophronia's smile was vicious. I think all of London will be very interested to hear how the Duke was found embracing his mistress in the middle of the night. Alone. Unchaperoned. How inappropriate. She is not my mistress. No? Then what is she? Sophronia's gaze swept over Carenza with contempt. A merchant's daughter playing dress-up in borrowed finery? A desperate social climber using her body to secure what she could never earn through merit? Because that's what everyone will believe. The words found their mark, Every insecurity Carenza had buried came roaring to the surface. "You think I don't know what you are?" Sophronia continued, stepping closer. "A temporary amusement, a distraction. When he tires of you, and he will, you'll go back to exactly what you were before. Nothing, no one, forgotten. That's enough." Hadrian's voice could have frozen the Thames. "Is it? I'm only saying what everyone thinks." Sophronia turned to her companions. "Come, ladies. We have news to share." They swept out, leaving devastation in their wake. Carenza couldn't breathe. The beautiful moment they'd shared lay ruined around them, replaced by the cold reality of everything Sophronia had said. "Carenza!" Hadrian reached for her. She stepped back. "Don't. What she said isn't true, isn't it?" Her voice faltered. "I am a merchant's daughter. Now I am wearing borrowed finery. I'm here because of an arrangement, not because I belong." She wrapped her arms around herself. "She's right about all of it. She's not right about any of it. Then what am I to you? Really?" The question hung between them, raw and bleeding. And Hadrian, the man who had kissed her like she was everything, stood silent. It was answer enough. 3 days passed in suffocating tension. Carenza withdrew to her rooms, pleading headaches that were only partially fabricated. Nanette brought meals that went largely untouched. Anthea knocked repeatedly, her worried voice muffled through the door. But Carenza couldn't face her cheerful optimism. Not now. The gossip had spread exactly as Sophronia intended. Whispers about the compromising position reached every drawing room in London. Speculation ran rampant. Was the Duke truly courting the Whitmore girl, or simply enjoying her company in less respectable ways? The ambiguity was intentional, poisoning the narrative just enough to taint Carenza's reputation, without providing anything concrete enough to refute. On the 4th morning, a letter arrived from her mother. "My dearest Carenza, word has reached us of difficulties. Your brother wishes to come to London immediately, but I've convinced him to wait. Whatever has happened, I trust you to handle it with the grace and strength I've always seen in you. Remember, my darling, our worth is not determined by what others say about us, but by what we know to be true in our own hearts. You have always been extraordinary. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. All my love." Mother Carenza read the letter 3 times, on her vision blurring with tears. Her mother, who had lost everything and kept going. Her mother, who still believed in her. A knock interrupted her tears. "Miss Whitmore," Mrs. Pemberton's voice, carefully neutral. "His Grace requests your presence in the library." Her chest constricted. She hadn't seen Hadrian since that night, had avoided even the possibility of encountering him. "Tell him I'm unwell." "I'm afraid he was quite insistent, miss. He said to tell you he has something that belongs to you." Curiosity warred with self-preservation. Curiosity won. She found him standing by the window, bathed in afternoon light that softened the harsh angles of his face. He looked as terrible as she felt. Shadowed eyes, drawn features, the weight of sleepless nights evident in every line of his body. For on the table before him sat a small wooden box. "You've been avoiding me," he said without preamble. "I've been recovering from public humiliation. Again. That wasn't your fault. Does it matter whose fault it was?" She stayed near the door, maintaining distance. "The damage is done. Everyone believes I'm your mistress now. When this arrangement ends, I won't just be forgotten. I'll be ruined." "The arrangement isn't ending." "Of course it is. Eventually. That was always the plan." He crossed to the table and picked up the wooden box. "Come here. Hadrian, please." The word, so unexpected from him, drew her forward against her will. She stopped an arm's length away, watching him open the box with hands that weren't entirely steady. inside, nestled in velvet, lay a necklace, but not just any necklace, a delicate chain of white gold, and holding a pendant that took her breath away, a single sapphire, deep blue as midnight, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like scattered stars. "This belonged to my mother," Hadrian said quietly. "Not the Ashworth collection, not something borrowed from the family vault. This was hers personally, given to her by my father on their wedding day." Carence's heart lurched. "I can't accept this." "You can. You will." He lifted the necklace from its box, moving behind her. "May I?" She should refuse. This was too much, too meaningful, too dangerous to the careful walls she'd been trying to rebuild. She nodded. His fingers brushed her neck as he fastened the clasp, leaving trails of fire against her skin. The pendant settled against her collarbone, cool and surprisingly light. "My mother was not born to nobility," he said, still standing behind her. She was a vicar's daughter. Society mocked her, dismissed her, and called her a fortune hunter despite the fact that my father had pursued her relentlessly. She endured it all because she believed their love was worth more than anyone's opinion. Carence turned to face him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked what you are to me." His voice was rough. And I was too much of a coward to answer. "Hadrian, you are not borrowed finery. You are not a temporary arrangement. You are not a convenience or a distraction or anything else Sophronia tried to make you believe." He took her face gently in his hands. "You are the first person in 3 years who has made me feel anything other than numb. You are brave and sharp and kind, and you unsettle me because I'm starting to realize I can't imagine this house without you in it." Her eyes glistened, tears spilling freely. This wasn't supposed to happen. No, it wasn't. He smiled, that transformative smile that changed his entire face. But it did, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. And Carence, wearing his mother's sapphire against her heart, finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could happen to girls like her. The Marchioness of Everleigh's masquerade was the event of the season. Everyone who was anyone would attend, hidden behind elaborate masks and centuries of social convention. It was the perfect setting for secrets to be whispered and alliances to be forged, or destroyed. Carence wore midnight blue velvet, a silver mask covering the upper half of her face. Hadrian's mother's sapphire gleamed at her throat, visible proof of something that had shifted between them. Beside her, Hadrian wore black on black, a dark wolf prowling through a garden of peacocks. They had discussed strategy during the carriage ride, danced together, but not exclusively. Circulate separately to demonstrate confidence. Meet for supper and present a united front. What they hadn't discussed was the way Carence's pulse raced when Hadrian looked at her, or the way his hand lingered at her waist, or the way everything felt different now, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "I'll find you before supper," he murmured as they entered the ballroom. "Don't let anyone corner you alone. I can handle myself. I know you can. I'm more worried about them." His smile held genuine warmth. "The last person who underestimated you is still nursing wounds to her pride." He disappeared into the masked crowd, and Carence found herself smiling. For 2 hours, she navigated the treacherous waters of society with unexpected ease. The mask helped. Stripped of identifying features, everyone was equal, and she found herself conversing freely with lords and ladies who might have snubbed her in daylight. She had just escaped a particularly tedious conversation about hunting dogs when a hand closed around her arm. "Miss Whitmore, a word." Quentin Ashford's voice sent ice through her veins. He pulled her through a doorway, into a smaller parlor, mercifully empty of guests. His mask was pushed up on his forehead, revealing the handsome face she had once loved, and now saw clearly for what it was. Calculating, desperate, dangerous. Let go of me. Not until you hear what I have to say. His grip tightened. You've landed quite the prize, haven't you? The Devil of Ashworth. Must be frightening, sharing a house with a murderer. He didn't murder anyone, didn't he? That's not what the servants say. Quentin's smile was ugly. I've been doing research, asking questions. His first wife didn't just fall from that tower, Carenza. She was pushed. You're lying. Am I? There was a witness, a maid who saw everything. She was paid handsomely to disappear. But money has a way of loosening tongues. He leaned closer. Your precious Duke killed his first wife. And when he tires of you, when you become inconvenient, what do you think will happen? Carenza's blood ran cold. Why are you telling me this? Because I made a mistake, letting Sophronia convince me to discard you. You were useful, pliable, and now you've attached yourself to one of the wealthiest men in England. His eyes glittered. I want back in. Introduce me to Ashworth. Help me secure a position with his investments, and I'll keep quiet about what I know. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a partnership. Take it, or I'll make sure every newspaper in London prints what I've learned by morning. The door opened behind them. Hadrian stood in the doorway, and his expression was the most dangerous thing Carenza had ever seen. Remove your hand from her, he said softly. Or I will remove it from your wrist. Quentin paled, but didn't release her. Ashworth, we were just discussing. I heard what you were discussing. Hadrian moved into the room, each step deliberate, predatory. You're attempting to blackmail the woman I love with lies you fabricated to serve your own pathetic ambitions. The woman I love. The words echoed through Carenza's mind, drowning out everything else. They're not lies, Quentin said, but his voice wavered. There was a witness. There was no witness. There was no push. There was only a desperately unhappy woman and a husband who failed to save her. Hadrian's voice splintered on the last word, and Carenza saw the truth of his grief laid bare. I have spent 3 years living with that guilt, and I will not have it weaponized by a fortune-hunting coward who couldn't recognize worth when it stood directly before him. He reached past Quentin and pulled Carenza free, positioning himself between them. You will leave London tonight, Hadrian continued, his voice regaining its deadly calm. You will never speak to Miss Whitmore again. You will never speak of me or my family again. And if I discover you've breathed a word of these accusations to anyone, I will use every ounce of influence and wealth I possess to ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life in debtor's prison. Do we understand each other? Quentin fled. In the silence that followed, Carenza found she couldn't stop shaking. He was lying, she whispered. Tell me he was lying. Hadrian turned to her, and the mask he wore, not the silk one covering his face, but the invisible one he'd maintained for years, crumbled completely. He was lying, he said, about the witness, the murder, all of it. But the guilt, that part is true. I did fail her. I did let her down. And I have spent every day since wondering if loving someone means inevitably destroying them. Hadrian, I love you. The words emerged raw, unvarnished. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. I told myself this was an arrangement, a convenience, a temporary solution. But somewhere between that first night and now, you became everything I never knew I needed. Carenza's vision blurred with emotion. I love you too. He kissed her then, in that empty parlor at a masquerade ball, with all of London celebrating just beyond the door. It was desperate and healing, and full of every word they'd been too afraid to say. And when they finally parted, his forehead rested against hers. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now we face whatever comes. Together." He pulled back, his thumbs brushing gently across her cheeks. "Will you marry me, Carenza Whitmore? Not as an arrangement, not as a performance, as the truth I never expected to find." "Yes." The word emerged without hesitation. 1,000 times, yes. He kissed her again, and for one perfect moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Then the door burst open, and the Dowager Duchess stood framed in the doorway, her expression thunderous. "Both of you," she said coldly. "My carriage." Now. The carriage ride to Ashworth House was silent as a tomb. The Dowager sat across from them, her fury radiating like heat from a forge. Hadrian's hand gripped Carenza's, but even that comfort couldn't stop the dread pooling in her stomach. Something had gone terribly wrong. When they arrived, the Dowager swept into the house without a backward glance. A servant appeared with whispered instructions, and suddenly, Carenza found herself separated from Hadrian, led to the Dowager's private sitting room, while he was directed elsewhere. "Sit," the Dowager commanded, when the door closed behind them. Carenza sat. "Do you know what you've done?" The Dowager's voice was ice. "Do you have any idea what chaos you've created?" "I don't understand. Lady Sophronia has filed a formal complaint with her family's solicitors. She claims Hadrian promised her marriage, that you are an interloper who seduced him away from his obligations, and that the Ashworth family has breached a verbal contract worth substantial damages." Carenza's blood ran cold. "That's absurd. Hadrian never promised her anything. It doesn't matter what actually happened. It matters what can be proven. And Sophronia has letters, correspondence from months ago, before you ever entered this picture, that can be interpreted as promises of intent." "Letters from whom?" The Dowager's expression hardened. "From me." The room tilted. "What?" "I told you. I wanted Hadrian married. I corresponded with Lady Sophronia's mother extensively, discussing terms, arrangements, and expectations. I used language that implied inevitability because I believed it was inevitable." The Dowager's hands twisted in her lap. "I never imagined my grandson would defy me so completely, and I certainly never imagined that foolish girl would use my letters as weapons. So we fight it. Hadrian can testify that he never agreed. And drag the family through a public scandal, have our private correspondence read aloud in courtrooms, give every gossip in London ammunition for years." The Dowager shook her head. "There's only one solution. The engagement between you and Hadrian must end. Publicly. Immediately. No, this isn't a negotiation, Miss Whitmore. I'm telling you what must happen to protect this family. He asked me to marry him tonight. I said yes." The Dowager flinched, but recovered quickly. "Then unsay it. Tell him you've reconsidered. Tell him you realized you're not suited for this life." "I won't lie to him." "You'll lie to him because it's the only way to save him." The Dowager's voice faltered, and for the first time, Carenza saw past the steel to the desperate grandmother beneath. "Do you understand what will happen if this goes to court? Every detail of Arabella's death will be exhumed. Every rumor, every whisper, every suspicion. They'll destroy him all over again." Carenza's heart fractured. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. I've consulted solicitors, advisors, everyone I trust. The only path forward is for you to leave, for the engagement to be portrayed as a misunderstanding, for Hadrian to make peace with Sophronia's family through negotiation. Without you. And if I refuse, then I will tell Hadrian what I did, that I orchestrated the entire situation at the Hartwell Ball, that I manipulated his meeting with you, that I've been pulling strings from the beginning." The Dowager's eyes glittered with unshed tears. He'll hate me. He'll hate you for being part of my machinations, even unwittingly. Either way, you lose him. At least this way, you lose him with his love intact." The cruelty of the choice was breathtaking. Leave and break his heart, or stay and watch as the truth destroyed everything between them anyway. "Give me tonight," Carenza whispered. "Let me say goodbye." "No goodbyes. They'll only make it harder. For both of you." The Dowager rose. "A carriage will take you home at first light. You'll leave a letter explaining that the situation has become untenable, that you've realized you're not suited to this world, that you wish him well. I'll handle the rest. This will destroy him. He's survived destruction before. He'll survive it again." The Dowager moved to the door. "I take no pleasure in this, Miss Whitmore. If circumstances were different. But they're not. No, they're not." The door closed, and Carenza was alone with the ruins of everything she had let herself hope for. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she wrote the letter she had been ordered to write, her vision blurring as she crafted lies she didn't believe. When dawn broke, she dressed in her original gown, the cream silk from the Hartwell ball, now a bitter reminder of where everything had begun. She left the sapphire necklace on her writing desk. She couldn't take it. It would hurt too much. The carriage waited in the pre-dawn gray. She climbed inside without looking back, because looking back would mean seeing Ashworth House, and seeing it would shatter her completely. The drive home took 2 hours. Her mother met her at the door, taking one look at her face and pulling her into an embrace that said everything words couldn't. "What happened?" her mother whispered. "I fell in love," Carenza said, "and it wasn't enough." She retreated to her narrow bed in her cramped room and let the grief finally consume her. 5 days passed in gray numbness. Carenza moved through the motions of her old life like a ghost, helping with meals, mending clothes, accompanying her mother to market. She answered questions in monosyllables and smiled when smiles were expected, and felt absolutely nothing. Her mother watched with worried eyes but didn't push. Her brother Corwin, informed of the situation through careful half-truths, raged about confronting the Duke, until Carenza's exhausted silence finally quieted him. While on the 6th morning, Anthea arrived. She burst through the modest door of their modest home with the force of a summer storm, windswept and furious, and utterly out of place in the cramped parlor. "How could you?" she demanded, gripping Carenza's shoulders. "How could you leave without a word, without saying goodbye? I left a letter." "That letter was rubbish, and we both know it." Anthea's eyes blazed. "You don't believe a single word you wrote. Neither does Hadrian. Neither does anyone with half a brain." Carenza's carefully constructed composure splintered. "You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Because my brother is destroying himself. He hasn't eaten. He barely sleeps. He's been tearing the house apart looking for answers, and all he has is a letter full of lies. The image of Hadrian's suffering was unbearable. Dwark, it's better this way. Better for whom? Not for him. Not for you." Anthea's voice softened. "Grandmother told me everything. About Sophronia's threats, the letters, the legal complications. She thinks she's protecting Hadrian by driving you away. She is protecting him. The scandal is happening anyway." Anthea pulled a newspaper from her bag, thrusting it toward Carenza. "Sophronia couldn't keep quiet. It's all over London. The speculation, the rumors, the accusations. Everything grandmother feared has already happened." Carenza's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Headlines screamed accusations and insinuations. The Duke of Ashworth's name dragged through public mud, every detail of the situation twisted and sensationalized. "He's facing it alone," Anthea said quietly. "Because you left. Because you chose to protect him by abandoning him. But he doesn't want protection, Carenza. He wants you. He can't want me. This will ruin him. He's already ruined. He was ruined the moment you walked out that door. Anthea gripped her hands. Listen to me. Grandmother was wrong. The choice she gave you was false. There was always another option. What option? Fight. Together. Face the scandal, the courts, the gossip. Face all of it as a united front. Anthea's eyes shone. Sophronia's letters prove nothing, except that an old woman wanted her grandson married. There's no breach of contract, because there was no contract. The entire legal threat is a bluff, and any competent solicitor would tear it apart in minutes. Hope stirred, painful and fragile. But your grandmother said, "My grandmother is frightened of losing another person she loves. She made a desperate decision based on fear, not logic." Anthea squeezed her hands. "Come back, please. Fight for him. And if fighting isn't enough, if we lose everything?" Anthea smiled, that warm, bright smile that was so different from her brother's rare ones, and yet somehow the same. Then you lose it together, which is still better than winning alone. Carenza looked around the cramped parlor of her family home, at her mother, who had appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright with emotion. At the narrow life she had returned to, the life she had convinced herself was all she deserved. And she made her choice. "Take me back." The carriage ride to London felt eternal. Anthea explained everything during the journey. How Hadrian had received Carenza's letter with cold silence. How he'd disappeared into his study for 3 days. How he'd emerged looking like death and demanded answers no one could give. How he'd confronted his grandmother, learned the truth of her manipulation, and spoken words so harsh that the dowager had locked herself in her rooms, weeping. "He's never spoken to her like that," Anthea said. "Never. Whatever he felt for you, it's stronger than anything I've ever seen from him." When they arrived at Ashworth House, evening had fallen. The windows glowed with warm light, but the house felt different, charged with tension, waiting. Carenza's legs shook as she climbed the front steps. She found him in the library, because of course that's where he would be. Their place, their sanctuary. And he stood with his back to the door, staring into the fire. He'd lost weight in 5 days. She could see it in the way his clothes hung. His hair was disheveled, his posture rigid with the effort of holding himself together. "Hadrian." He spun around, and the expression on his face, raw hope and desperate love and agonizing vulnerability, undid her completely. "You came back. I never should have left." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt wetness on her neck and realized he was crying. This proud, guarded man was crying into her hair. "I thought I'd lost you," he said roughly. "I thought—" "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She pulled back, touching his face tenderly. "Your grandmother gave me an impossible choice, and I thought leaving would protect you. I don't want protection. I want you." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and the corners of her eyes. "I want messy and complicated and difficult. I want scandal and judgment, and every obstacle society can throw at us. I want all of it, as long as I have you." "Then you have me." She smiled through her tears. "For as long as you want me." "Forever," he said. "I want you forever." And when he kissed her, it tasted like coming home. 1 month later, the Ashworth Ball was the most anticipated event of the season. Everyone knew what it meant. The Duke was making a statement, a public declaration that could not be misunderstood or misinterpreted. Society had spent weeks speculating, gossiping, choosing sides in a battle that had captivated London's imagination. Tonight, the battle would end. So Carenza stood before the mirror in her chambers, scarcely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The gown was extraordinary, ivory silk embroidered with silver thread and tiny seed pearls, catching light like scattered moonlight. The sapphire necklace lay against her throat, finally back where it belonged. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style, threaded through with white roses. She looked like a bride. "Ready?" Anthea appeared behind her, eyes bright with excitement. "Nervous? Good. Nerves mean it matters." Anthea squeezed her hand. "He's waiting for you at the top of the stairs. The whole ballroom is watching." The walk through Ashworth House felt like a dream. Carenza passed the library where she had first glimpsed Hadrian's vulnerability, the parlor where she had faced the dowager's interrogation, the entrance hall where she had arrived, frightened and desperate, on that one impossible night. How much had changed since then, how much she had changed. She reached the grand staircase and stopped. Below, the ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles. 400 guests filled the space, lords and ladies, rivals and allies, everyone who mattered in London society. They looked up at her, with expressions ranging from curiosity to hostility to reluctant admiration. And at the foot of the stairs, waiting for her, stood Hadrian. He wore midnight blue to complement her ivory, his dark hair swept back, his wintry gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. At his side stood the Dowager Duchess, her expression complicated, but no longer hostile. They had reached a fragile peace, grandmother and grandson, not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. Carenza descended the staircase. Each step felt weighted with significance. She was aware of every watching eye, every whispered comment, and every judgment being passed. Lady Sophronia stood near the refreshment table, her face pale with fury and defeat. Her legal threats had crumbled exactly as Anthea predicted, leaving her nothing but humiliation. Carenza reached the bottom step. Hadrian extended his hand, and she took it. "You look," he said quietly, "like everything I never knew I wanted. Flatterer. Truth-teller." He smiled, that transformative expression she would never tire of seeing. "Are you ready?" "For what?" Instead of answering, he turned to face the assembled crowd. The whispers died into silence. "You all know why you're here," Hadrian said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "You've heard the rumors, the speculation, and the accusations. You've watched and judged and chosen sides in a drama that was never yours to arbitrate." Carenza's pulse quickened. "Tonight, I end the speculation." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "6 weeks ago, I found this woman at her lowest moment, publicly humiliated, abandoned, left to face the cruelty of society alone. I claimed her as mine without asking her permission, dragged her into my complicated life without explaining my reasons, and told myself it was all strategy." His voice softened, becoming intimate despite the hundreds of listeners. "I was lying to myself. From the moment she took my hand in that ballroom, scared but brave, desperate but proud, I knew she was different. I knew she was remarkable. I knew that whatever protection I offered her, she would repay 1,000-fold by simply being herself." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. Carenza's lungs forgot how to function. "I asked you to marry me once, in secret, in a moment of crisis. You said yes, but you deserve more than a desperate question in an empty parlor." He opened the box, revealing a ring that sparkled like captured starlight, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, matching the necklace at her throat. "You deserve a proposal before witnesses, before the world, before everyone who ever doubted your worth or dismissed your value." He went down on one knee. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible, but Carenza barely heard it. Her entire existence had narrowed to this man, this moment, this impossible, beautiful reality. "Carenza Whitmore," Hadrian said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are the bravest person I have ever known. You taught me that walls built for protection can become prisons. You reminded me that love is worth every risk, every fear, every vulnerability it demands. You brought me back to life when I had forgotten what living felt like." His eyes shone. "Will you marry me? Not in secret, not as strategy, but as the simple, exhilarating, magnificent truth." Her eyes glistened, emotion overwhelming her. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then rose and pulled her into a kiss that was entirely improper for a public setting. The ballroom erupted, not in scandal, not in judgment, but in applause. Tentative at first, then growing, spreading, building into a wave of approval that washed over them like benediction. Even the dowager was clapping, emotion evident on her weathered face. When they finally broke apart, Hadrian pressed his forehead to hers. "They're applauding," she whispered. "They're intimidated by me. They'd applaud anything I told them to." She laughed, a real, full laugh that seemed to surprise them both. Probably true. Definitely true. He pulled back, his smile soft with wonder. "Dance with me, future Duchess." She took his hand. "Always." 6 months later, the Duchess of Ashworth stood in the ballroom of Ashworth House, watching her husband navigate a conversation with 3 nervous lords who seemed uncertain whether to be awed or unsettled by his attention. "He still unnerves them," Anthea observed, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "He always will. He enjoys it too much to stop." "And you? Does he still unsettle you?" Carenza smiled. "Never." It had been 6 months since the wedding, a ceremony small by ducal standards, attended only by those who truly mattered. Her mother had wept throughout. Corwin had stood as witness, cleaned up and employed now in one of Hadrian's legitimate business ventures. The dowager had given a speech that managed to be both apologetic and commanding, a combination only she could achieve. The scandal had faded, as scandals always did. Lady Sophronia had married a minor viscount and moved to the country. Quinton Ashford had disappeared to the continent, 1 step ahead of creditors. The gossip had found new targets, and the Duke of Ashworth's love story had transformed from scandal to romance in the collective memory. "There's something I need to tell you," Carenza said, her hand drifting unconsciously to her stomach. "Something I haven't told Hadrian yet." Anthea's eyes went wide. "You're not." "I am." The shriek that escaped Anthea drew attention from half the ballroom, including Hadrian, who excused himself from the nervous lords and crossed to his wife's side with alarmed speed. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Carenza said, taking his hands. "Everything is exactly right," she told him. For a moment, he simply stared at her, processing. Then his face transformed, that astonishing smile breaking through, more radiant than she had ever seen it. "Truly?" "Truly." He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around in the middle of their own ballroom. Decorum be damned. The guests watched with varying degrees of shock and delight, but neither of them cared. I love you," he said against her hair. "I love you. I love you. I love you too." She pulled back, touching his face with infinite tenderness. "Both of us do." Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the house had grown quiet, they stood together in the library, their place, their sanctuary. "Do you remember," Hadrian said, "the first time you came to this room? You told me I looked exhausted." "You did. You do, occasionally still. You told me to sit, as if you had any right to give the Duke of Ashworth orders." "I was practicing," she smiled, "for when I became a duchess myself." He laughed, that sound she had worked so hard to earn that she would spend the rest of her life treasuring. You were remarkable from the very beginning. I should have known then that I didn't stand a chance. You didn't, and neither did I. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Isn't it wonderful? He pressed a kiss to her forehead. It's everything. And there, in the library of Ashworth House, the Duke who had been called a devil and the woman who had been called nothing found what they had both stopped believing in. A love story. Their own. Forever. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convention, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more tales of passion, resilience, and the transformative power of love. Until next time, remember, the best stories are the ones we choose to believe in.